Mr. President, this is really an honor for me, and I particularly deem this an honor because I want you to know how much I appreciate and the people of Florida appreciate the approach that you take to leading and governing in a bipartisan way. The people of this state cry out for that bipartisanship as we try to get our arms around these huge problems that are facing our communities, our state, and our country. I'm grateful at your personal invitation that I come here today, along with the President pro tempore, Senator Carlton, the Majority Leader, Dan Webster, who we've been in the legislature together way back a long time ago, and the Minority Leader, Senator Geller. So thank you for this invitation. I've been given just a short period of time, and I want to discuss a matter that is fitting to discuss as we come together in this city and this state. It's an issue that's all too familiar, but it's one that's sacred to our democracy, and it is the right to vote and to have that vote counted. A year ago, you all passed a bill to move the presidential primary to an early date on the national election calendar. Your thinking was to give our very large and diverse state, which is a microcosm of the country, more of a say in the selection of our presidential nominees. And of course, we know what's happened. Both national parties decided to punish Florida because the rules reserve the early presidential contest for those privileged first four small states. And for 8 months now, since last summer, I have been immersed in a fight to get the chairman of my party to end the stalemate and to seat the delegation and to honor the January 29th primary. And of course, it was a historic turnout. A total of 3.6 million citizens headed to the polls and cast the ballots in both of the presidential primaries. And so as I have engaged in this quest, for me, it's fairly simple. It's a case of fundamental rights versus party rules. So last October, I had to sue my own party and the chairman in federal district court. In December, the judge ruled against us, basically counting on a Supreme Court decision from the 1970s that said that a political party can do whatever it wants to with regard to the selection of its delegates. I disagree. I think there are very valid constitutional arguments of equal protection of the laws, and yet I did not have time to appeal that decision since the primary was right upon us. And we've continued the push for my party to find a way to seat the delegation from Florida to give Floridians a meaningful voice in the selection. Basically, what I stand on is the principle that every citizen has an equal right to vote. And it's based on something that we're pretty sensitive about in this state, and that is that each Floridian is entitled to have their vote count and have it count as they intended it. And it's based on a belief that we deserve a say in picking our presidential nominees. And so then we went through the drill of seeing if we could get a compromise of a mail-in vote. But the party declined. People couldn't agree on the specifics, including the candidates themselves. And now we're at a critical point where reaching a solution is very elusive. I've suggested another compromise of taking what the party rules say, which is if you exceed the February 5th date, you can seat half of the delegation. This is allowed by the Democratic rules, and it was done by the GOP. Well, if nothing else, this election has provided further evidence that our system is broken. And I wanted to come here today to compliment you and to compliment Governor Crist. You all are to be commended for the elections reform that you have already brought into being. For example, banning the touchscreen voting machines. And that was after we've had, as I said, some sensitive times here in Florida. And this year, legislation has been introduced to toughen the audits of election results. So I came here to thank you for that. And what you've done in Florida must not be an end, but it must be a beginning. As to our right to vote and to have that vote count, there can be no debate. And the goal is simple: one person, one vote. So taking some cues from you, last fall I filed legislation in the U.S. Senate requiring that no vote for federal office to be cast on a touchscreen voting machine starting in the presidential election of 2012. I joined with the senior senator from Michigan, Senator Levin, to propose a system of 6 rotating primaries from March until June in each presidential election year. And very soon I'm going to file an even broader-based election reform bill. And this legislation is going to suggest that we abolish the Electoral College and give citizens direct election of their president by popular vote. And those 6 rotating interregional primaries will give both large and small states a fair say in the nomination process. And the legislation would do what we do here in Florida for the whole country. It would establish early voting in every state. And it'll eliminate machines that don't produce a paper trail. And it will allow every qualified voter in every state to cast an absentee ballot, if that is their preference. And it'll give grants to states on a trial basis to develop mail-in balloting, like they do in Oregon, and secure internet voting on a trial basis. So I'm reaching out to my colleagues in Congress, and I'm reaching out to you. I respectfully ask each of you for your suggestions to make this a better bill for reform in the election process in our country as a whole. Let's don't forget that it was 230 years ago that the Founding Fathers declared that all men are created equal. But the country still had to wait 87 more years before President Lincoln signed the proclamation freeing the slaves. And then it took another 57 years before women in America were allowed to vote. And even though she tried back in 1872, Susan B. Anthony, she was arrested for trying to vote. And she gave a speech on that. The ballot, she said, is the only means of securing the blessings of liberty provided by this government. And even still, it took another 93 years before our nation belatedly enacted a law guaranteeing every citizen an equal right to vote in the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This country cannot afford to wait another 93 years before we fix the flaws we still see in our election system. because the blessings of liberty cannot wait. I believe the time for reform is now, especially what we've been going through. And I especially wanted to come here and thank you all for your courage and your leadership, and Mr. President, your leadership in showing the way for the rest of this country. Thank you. God bless you, and God bless our country.